January 332 BC. Alexander the Great stands on the Phoenician coast and stares across open water at a problem no commander has ever solved. He has just crushed the Persian king Darius III at Issus. The Persian Empire is fracturing. City after city along the eastern Mediterranean coast has opened its gates. Byblos fell. Sidon fell. The road south toward Egypt and east toward the heart of Persia looks clear. Almost. Half a mile offshore, rising straight from the sea like something that was never meant to be taken, sits the island city of Tyre. Its walls climb directly from the waterline. No beach, no approach, no foothold. Two harbors, one to the north and one to the south, shelter a powerful fleet. Inside those walls, a professional mercenary garrison stands ready, backed by a navy that has controlled these waters for generations. The city holds roughly 40,000 people. Its women and children have already been evacuated to Carthage, the great Phoenician colony in the western Mediterranean. The men who remain have no intention of surrendering. Tyre has every reason for confidence. 2 centuries earlier, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar besieged this city for 13 years and walked away with nothing. The sea had never been defeated. And Alexander the Great, whatever his victories on land, commands no meaningful fleet. The Tyrians sent envoys to meet him on the march. They offered respect, even tribute. But when Alexander asked to enter the city and sacrifice at the temple of Melkart, the Phoenician god the Macedonians equated with Heracles, the Tyrians refused. No Persian and no Macedonian would pass through their gates. He was welcome, they said, to use the old mainland temple instead. Alexander sent a second delegation. The Tyrians killed his envoys and threw their bodies from the walls into the sea. That was not a refusal. That was a declaration. Alexander convened his commanders and made the case himself. Bypassing Tyre was not an option. A hostile naval base at his rear could sever his supply lines, threaten Greece, and give Persia the platform it needed to rebuild sea power behind him while his army pushed east. Every campaign objective, Egypt, Babylon, the Persian heartland, depended on securing this coastline first. Tyre had to fall. His solution, as his commanders listened, was not what any of them expected. He would build a road across the sea. The idea was not fantasy. It was engineering. The channel between the mainland and the island was shallow near the shore, barely 2 meters in places. Alexander ordered the demolition of Old Tyre, the abandoned mainland settlement sitting just behind him. Its stones, its rubble, its timber would become the fill of a causeway, extending westward across the water toward the island walls. The Macedonian army would walk to Tyre. Work began in January. Near the coast, the water was shallow and the seafloor muddy, and construction moved quickly. Thousands of soldiers and local laborers hauled rubble from the ruins of Old Tyre and drove it into the channel. The causeway grew, and then as it extended further from shore and the island drew closer, everything changed. The Tyrian catapults on the walls could now reach the workers. Tyrian galleys sortied from the northern and southern harbors, sweeping along both flanks of the exposed mole and pelting the construction crews with arrows and missiles. The seafloor began to shelve downward. Near the city walls, the water dropped to 18 feet. Construction slowed to almost nothing. The causeway sat exposed, narrow, and under constant fire from 3 directions. Alexander's answer was to build 2 siege towers at the forward edge of the mole, enormous wooden structures, possibly the tallest of their kind ever constructed, standing nearly 50 meters high. They were covered in rawhide to resist fire arrows, fitted with catapults at the top to suppress the defenders on the walls, and equipped with ballistae below to hurl stone at the hulls of attacking ships. The towers were designed to dominate the approach. For a time, they did. The Tyrians watched them carefully, and then they built a trap of their own. They took an old horse transport ship and filled its hull with dried branches, pitch, sulfur, and every combustible material they could find. From the masts, they hung cauldrons filled with oil, positioned so that when the masts burned through, the cauldrons would fall and spill onto whatever was beneath them. They weighed down the ship's stern so that the bow rose above the waterline. When the wind shifted in their favor, Tyre and triremes towed the fire ship out of the harbor and aimed it at the causeway. The bow drove up onto the mole. The cauldrons fell. The towers ignited. While the fires spread and Macedonian crews scrambled to respond, Tyrian galleys swarmed the causeway from both sides, destroying everything the fire had not yet reached and tearing down the wooden palisades Alexander had built to protect the workers. By the time the assault was over, both towers were gone. The forward edge of the mole was wrecked. The Tyrians had won the first round, and they had done it with improvisation, timing, and nerve. Alexander looked at the burned-out end of his causeway and made a decision that would define the entire siege. He did not retreat. He did not negotiate. He ordered the causeway widened and rebuilt, this time broader, more stable, resistant to weather and flanking attack. And then he left. He traveled north to Sidon because he had finally identified the real constraint. The causeway alone could not win the siege. To take Tyre, he needed the sea. What followed was a feat of strategic assembly that the Tyrians had not anticipated and could not match. The Phoenician fleets of Byblos and Arwad had already come over to Alexander after their cities surrendered. Sidon contributed its triremes. Ships arrived from Rhodes, from Lycia, from Cilicia, from Soli, from Malis, from Macedon itself. And then, hearing of the Persian defeat at Issus and seeing the entire Phoenician coast falling under Macedonian control, the kings of Cyprus sent approximately 120 ships to Sidon. When Alexander counted his fleet, it numbered around 220 vessels, more than enough to overwhelm anything Tyre could put to sea. While the fleet assembled, he also received 4,000 mercenary reinforcements under a commander named Cleander, who had been sent to Greece months earlier to recruit. The pieces were coming together, and none of this was visible from Tyre's walls. The Tyrians had built their entire defense on one assumption, that Alexander was a land commander with no fleet. That assumption was now obsolete. They simply did not know it yet. Alexander sailed for Tyre with his full fleet in formation, his own flagship positioned on the right wing. When the armada came within clear sight of the island, he ordered it to halt. The fleet sat in the water, visible from every wall, every tower, every harbor mouth, 220 ships in open formation, blocking the horizon. Tyre's navy did not sortie. There was nothing to sortie against. The numbers were too far gone. Alexander waited long enough for the sight to register, and then he moved in and sealed both harbors. The northern and southern harbor entrances were now blockaded from outside. The Tyrian fleet was trapped inside. The causeway construction resumed behind the naval screen, and this time, nothing could stop it. What followed was not a single dramatic assault. It was an engineering war fought meter by meter against a city that refused to accept the mathematics of its own situation. Alexander mounted battering rams on ships and began probing the walls at multiple points around the island's perimeter. The Tyrians had anticipated this. They had dropped large stone blocks into the water near the base of the walls to keep the rams from reaching them. Alexander responded by fitting crane ships with lasso-like grappling cables and towing the boulders clear of the walls. The Tyrians then armored their own galleys and sent divers beneath the water to cut the anchor cables of the Macedonian ram ships. Alexander replaced the rope cables with iron chains. The divers could not cut iron. The Tyrians tried one more time to seize the initiative. Their lookouts had noted a pattern. Every afternoon, Alexander returned to the mainland for a meal and rest, and much of his navy accompanied him. They waited for that window, sortied from the harbor, and hit the Macedonian positions with everything they had. But Alexander had broken his routine. He was present. He led the counterattack personally. The Tyrian sortie was driven back into the harbor with losses, and the harbor mouth was sealed again. That was the last time the Tyrian fleet acted as a meaningful offensive force. The rams went back to work. Alexander tested section after section of wall, looking not for the strongest point, but for the weakest. The fleet kept simultaneous pressure on multiple sides, forcing the defenders to stretch across the entire perimeter, rather than concentrate against any single threat. The walls were formidable. Accounts suggest they reached somewhere near 150 feet on the landward side, though some historians regard that figure as an exaggeration. But they had been built to hold off ships at distance, not to absorb sustained battering from rams anchored directly against them. The southern wall gave way first. The rams opened a breach, small but real. Alexander coordinated what came next with deliberate precision. His fleet bombarded every other section of wall simultaneously. The Tyrian garrison, already stretched thin around the island's full perimeter, could not pull forces from the north to reinforce the south without abandoning walls that were also under attack. The breach held. Assault ships moved into the gap. Gangplanks dropped. Macedonian infantry poured through. According to Arrian, Alexander himself fought from atop one of his siege towers during the final assault, at the front of the attack on a city he had been building toward for 7 months. Once the breach was forced, and the garrison was fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, against the infantry through the southern wall, against the fleet pressing the harbors, against the troops coming across the causeway. The defense collapsed. The Tyrians were overwhelmed not by a single attack, but by the impossibility of the position Alexander had spent 7 months constructing around them. Some sought sanctuary in the temple of Melkart. Those who did, including the king of Tyre, were pardoned. The rest faced the accumulated fury of an army that had been under fire, in the water, and in the dirt for the better part of a year. Accounts of the aftermath differ. Arrian records approximately 8,000 killed in the city. Quintus Curtius Rufus gives a different accounting. Around 6,000 fighters killed inside the walls and 2,000 crucified on the beach. Around 30,000 people were sold into slavery. The severity of what followed reflected both the length of the siege and the earlier Tyrian execution of Alexander's envoys. What is not debated is the scale. The city that had never fallen from the sea was now rubble. The strategic consequences were immediate. The eastern Mediterranean coastline was under Macedonian control from end to end. The Persian navy had lost its most important harbor, and the Phoenician fleets that had composed much of its strength. Alexander's supply line south was secure. Egypt lay open. The road east toward Babylon and the Persian heartland no longer had a hostile naval power capable of threatening it from behind. But there was something beyond the campaign map that Tyre's fall had revealed. Alexander was not only the cavalry commander who had shattered Persian armies at the Granicus and at Issus. He was an engineering commander, a logistical commander, a naval commander. He had assembled a fleet from disparate allies across the eastern Mediterranean while maintaining a siege on an island fortress. He had identified the real constraint of the problem, the absence of sea power, and solved it completely before attempting the decisive blow. He had turned the Tyrians' greatest geographical advantage, the sea itself, into a neutralized factor. The causeway he built did not disappear when the fighting ended. Over the centuries, sediment accumulated around the stone and rubble mole, widening it, solidifying it, transforming it into a permanent land bridge. Tyre was no longer an island. The city that had been defined by the sea's protection for centuries became a peninsula. The modern city of Sur in southern Lebanon sits on that peninsula today. On the same ground, Alexander's engineers built from the ruins of old Tyre, extending it stone by stone across the water. Every commander before Alexander had stood on that coastline and looked at the channel and turned away. Nebuchadnezzar had tried for 13 years and accepted the sea's verdict. The Persians had used Tyre's island position as the cornerstone of their Mediterranean naval strategy, precisely because no land army had ever defeated it. Alexander looked at the same water and started building. From Tyre, he marched south. Gaza fell after a 2-month siege. Egypt opened without a battle. Then he turned east. The empire Tyre had anchored, the Persian naval supremacy that city had been built to project, did not survive the year. 7 months of causeway construction, fire ships, rebuilt moles, crane ships, chain cables, and relentless multi-point pressure had dissolved the one geographical advantage that was supposed to make Tyre permanent. The Unconquerable had been conquered, not by a single stroke of brilliance, but by a commander who identified the real problem, absorbed a major setback without flinching, solved the constraint at its root, and then delivered the killing blow from every direction at once, giving the enemy nowhere to concentrate, nowhere to hold, and no path back out. Which commander's tactical decisions should we break down next?